Mikaru looked at them confused. "Where are you heading?" inquired Kuro Silk. "The rest of her team is at the top of this building," replied Lex, referring to Mikaru. "We were heading to her." Kuro Silk nodded and made her way to the building door, opening it, not that she had to, with all the glass smashed out, with only a few random chunks still in the pummeled frame. She held the door for Lex and Mikaru, and with her free hand motioned for them to enter. Mikaru entered. Lex walked through the smashed-out window next to the door, so he did not have to duck. Kuro Silk let the door go and simply walked through the glassless frame. They stared at the destroyed lobby, all the objects thrown about and covered in filth. Kuro Silk moved forward, her heels clicking on the ground as she surveyed the area. "How do we get to the top?" asked Mikaru. "Do we risk the elevator?" stated Lex. Kuro Silk spied some small lights from coffee makers, computers, fax machines, and other random office equipment. "There may still be power to the building, but it's probably best not to risk it. The power could fail at any moment, and we could end up stuck and trapped." "We'll have to take the stairs," said Kuro Silk. "All the way up?" moaned Mikaru as she hung her head in disappointment. "We also don't know what's hiding in here. The elevator doors could open, subjecting us to one of those things," added Kuro Silk. The group made their way up a grand double staircase to an upper lobby, equally devastated by the destruction. From there, they found the entrance to the stairwell and began to make their ascent. "You know this building is like 100 stories, right?" chimed Mikaru as they made it to the halfway point of the first flight. Lex, in the middle of Mikaru and Kuro Silk, turned back, looking down at Mikaru, placing his hand on top of her head and rubbing her hair. "Complaining isn't helpful or cute," he remarked as he then turned and started back up the stairs. Mikaru puffed out her cheeks and made a face at him before continuing up the stairs as well. They made it to the 20th story, with no incident being able to keep inside the stairwell. Now the stairwell ended. Kuro Silk slowly slid the door to the office floor open and peered out, scanning the floor covered by the sea of cubicles. She found the entrance to the next set of stairs on the other side, on the adjacent wall. She turned to the others and motioned them to follow. She drew her katana as she crouched, walked down the side of the aisle of cubicles, then Lex and Mikaru doing the same. They could hear the faint murmurings of "skibidi, skibidi" from various spots on the floor. Something was in the dark on the floor with them. Kuro Silk came to the end of the cubicles and stopped dead with fear as she peered around the corner. Right there, facing out, looking onto the rest of the floor, was a skibidi. She jerked back, her long white hair trailing behind in a wave-like motion as it followed her head back. She motioned for the others to stop and remain quiet. Lex held up his revolver. Kuro Silk shook her head no. She leaned forward once more, raising her katana up. She leered at the skibidi as she silently guided the blade through the air. As the tip neared the head, she quickly stabbed it into the temple. The skibidi's eyes grew wide and mouth agape with the quick shock, and then the head went limp in silence. The toilet was dead. She pulled the blade out and motioned for the others. They rounded the corner and passed the dead skibidi. Kuro Silk, still crouched, opened the stairwell door. She ushered them in and then spun around as she backed in through the doorway, closing the door as she entered. They continued on. Back on the rooftop, Ryoko continued to wait. The ground began to rumble. Then she heard the deep bellowing, echoing "skibidi, skibidi" from something gigantic. She peered over the edge of the building to see the titanic Skibidi leader. He was gliding into the area below. His voice began to change as he came across all the toilets below killed by Ryoko, Lex, Mikaru, and Kuro Silk. The bellowing "skibidi, skibidi" now became more angry and rageful. His neck began to stretch and rise up alongside the building. Ryoko's eyes grew large with fear as she lifted her rifle up and took off running. Faster and faster, she desperately tried to increase her speed. She leaped into the air and crashed through the roof access door and onto the landing just inside the tips of her boots, disappearing past the door frame, as the Skibidi leader's head and eyes crested of the top of the building, rage filling his face. Ryoko plastered her back against the wall, her knees bent, pulled up to her chest, cradling her rifle as she hid behind the open door. Her breathing became heavier and heavier as the Skibidi leader's head was fully above the building, staring down as he moved along, noticing the door ajar. Then the thrumming of helicopter blades became audible as a flight of AH-64 Apache Longbow helicopters charged towards the Skibidi leader. The Skibidi leader turned as AMG-114 Hellfire missiles were released from their rails and careened towards the Skibidi leader. His eyes began to glow, charging energy up. Lasers then fired from his eyes, destroying the missiles. He then began to sweep his eye lasers back and forth across the sky, trying to swat the helicopters as he now moved away from the building. Ryoko breathed a sigh of relief but continued to hide inside the roof access door. At the same time, Kuro Silk, Lex, and Mikaru had reached the halfway point of their ascent up the building. Once again, the stairwell had come to an end, and they needed to venture out onto the floor and find the door to the next stairwell.